Thank you, Martin. I understand this is as you say, the last seminar of the season. Martin very kindly said it was the highlight of the season, but I think he might have been overselling the presentation this evening. It's a great pleasure to be here today to discuss the Social Value Act, which I'm sure many of the people in this room are at least a little bit familiar with. But may I start by saying to the Department for Justice, it does deserve credit for having the courage to pioneer some new kinds of commissioning, and I believe it is setting an example perhaps other departments could do well to follow. Because of this, I believe it is fitting that this Academy seminar should be the first event that I have addressed as the government's new social value ambassador. As with any reform of the public sector, it is important that the government shows its commitment to driving through a long-term cultural change. And I believe this new position, coupled with the already excellent work of the Efficiency and Reform Group in overhauling the way that we think about commissioning, shows this government's determination to achieve results. Procurement, although it sometimes can be seen as a slightly dry topic, I think we'd all agree with that. But procurement and commissioning is a far more important issue today than it was even a few years ago when I was elected into Parliament. When money is tight, when the challenges that we face continue to rise, we need to make sure that we are commissioning in the most effective and best way possible to achieve the best outcomes possible. And the debate about how we commission goods and services becomes incredibly important in our daily lives. Personally, I have been engaged in this debate over the past 2 years since entering Parliament through what was the Private Members Bill, now the Public Services, open brackets, Social Value, close brackets, Act 2012. I introduced the Act on the basis of my personal experience as a local councillor and as a parliamentary candidate. During that time before coming to Westminster, I had the opportunity to meet with many fantastic local community organisations, which I believed could make a significant difference and a positive impact in our area if they had more opportunity to bid for and run some of our public services and to gain access to the funding which was traditionally used by others to scale up their important activities. So when I had the opportunity in June 2010 to introduce the Private Members Bill, I knew I wanted to do something which could directly support these kind of organisations in the community, not only that I lived in, but communities across the country. Fortunately, and I'm sure people are aware of private members' bills and the usual sort of car crash that they end up in, I was not alone in wanting to achieve this, and I found support from right across the political spectrum, and of course, if people know anything about private members' bills, also support from the government. I think that everybody recognises that in civil society we have a great and untapped resource in terms of enthusiasm, expertise and dedication that can be used to create the better outcomes that I mentioned. The Social Value Act is an attempt to try and provide some concrete measures to go alongside the rhetoric that has been expressed for quite some time by politicians from all sides. When drafting the Act, I wanted to put together legislation that was not coercive or negative. I didn't want to force procurement officers or commissioners, and I'm sure there are many of you in this room, to have to go through what is seen as a bit of a yawn, another tick box exercise. I wanted to create an opportunity for public bodies to be creative, to think innovatively about the way they are procuring goods and services, and to give them the cover that they need in legislative terms to be bold. As I'm sure you all appreciate, our country is facing incredibly difficult economic times, not just over the next few years, but potentially over the next 50 years, and perhaps more. Rapidly ageing population, more complicated medical needs, environmental challenges, and competing in a very globalised economy means that the heady days of the late 90s and the early 2000s, when governments could be, let's say, more generous with public money on certain issues, are well and truly over. Every single penny of public money needs to be spent wisely and focused on delivering outcomes. This is going to require public bodies to think about and potentially redesign the way that they procure goods and services. It is this need to develop solutions to long-term challenges that, in my view, makes the Social Value Act so fundamentally important. As I mentioned earlier, civil society organisations have these untapped resources, talent and expertise that we need to make sure they are engaging far more in commissioning and the delivery of our public services. The Social Value Act is a culmination of many years of work, not just mine, and thought around the ideas of successful commissioning. It being not just a top-down process where public bodies or organisations say this is the service or the good or work we are commissioning. Do you agree with it? Do you think we could improve it? Rather, we, I hope, are moving towards a more holistic concept of co-production, where public bodies are expected to find out the answer to the question, what are the priorities? What are your priorities for our local area? How can we make all services and goods we commission deliver on such priorities? How do we tap into the talents and expertise of local people and local organisations? Is there an opportunity to engage with social enterprises or voluntary organisations in this rather than our more traditional providers? This comes back to the cultural change which is necessary, I believe, to create across the public sector. And the Social Value Act is about enabling local authorities and other public bodies to embrace this cultural change and not fear that there will be legal consequences to their actions. But to come a little bit closer to the $1 million question, what does the Act specifically do? This is the little bit more of a jargon that I will go into, but I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. What does the Act do? It places a requirement on public bodies to consider the economic, environmental and social benefits, what the Act terms as a whole, the social value a service contract could create in addition to the benefits that will be accrued through to the delivery of the service itself. This intervention is going to take place at the pre-procurement stage of the process so that social value can be inbuilt into any potential public service contract from the very beginning, rather than being tagged on at the end as what could be described as an afterthought. I'm pleased to say that many public bodies are already adopting this approach, and I can think of a number of housing associations that are already seeking to secure both, and this to me is very important, both the best price, but also meet the wider social, economic and environmental needs of the community that they intend to serve. However, not all are. But this will give, this Act will give the opportunity for commissioners to stop and think more holistically about the outcomes they are trying to achieve for their communities, and how we can be more creative in the use of our public services to achieve these goals. The Social Value Act also asks public bodies to consider the need to consult on how social value can be created through public services that they are procuring. While the Act stipulates that this is merely a duty to consider consultation, I believe that for those organisations which are seeking to create or generate a maximum social value from the services that they are procuring, they should read this as a duty to consult. From my experience speaking with civil society organisations and public bodies that have adopted the social value approach, regular consultation is essential. In order to really understand the needs of people on the ground who are using these public services, organisations need to tap into the informal networks and expertise that civil society or organisations can maximise and generate. Consultation not only enables organisations to understand better the needs of local people, but it can also generate new ideas and new approaches to delivering services and delivering better outcomes through citizens being feeling more engaged in the delivery of that service that they will inevitably use. Consultation is also useful in helping civil society organisations prepare themselves for contracts. Unlike private sector organisations, which perhaps may be more nimble in the way that they approach these contracts, civil society often have more complicated governance structures and do not have the ability to raise finance, which is obviously particularly important in a similar manner. Good consultation can give these organisations a chance to prepare to ensure that there is a diverse set of bidders to run a specific public service. But how does this work in practice? An example which can be used is that of the delivery of Meals on Wheels service for older people. Rather than just focusing on the routine Meals on Wheels service, the local authority could choose to consult with service users, local residents and charities to see what additional social value could be created. A potential outcome might be that Meals on Wheels should be delivered to the homes of residents by volunteer champions to not only help them with their food, but also to combat things like loneliness, isolation that can often cause problems in later life. By building social value into the specification of the service right from the very beginning, organisations can ensure a range of partners are available to deliver the service and ensure that they get the best possible outcome, again, for their communities that they serve. I believe that social value is possible for practically every sector, including housing. If we think creatively enough, the potential for social value is endless. Social value, though, is not the same everywhere. And in a London borough, may have different requirements to a local authority based in the home counties. Another challenge that the Social Value Act creates, unlike commissioning purely on the basis of financial cost, which has a clear metric against which it can be compared, i.e. the financial or monetary value, social value involves a complicated evaluation process, and I would argue is inherently more political. For example, say an area has both a high level of unemployment but also significant environmental degradation. Now, which do you put at the heart of the social value aspect of the commissioning process? Economic well-being or the environmental well-being? Ideally, of course, one would like to see both. But there is a danger that if we get into a situation of comparing apples and oranges, this is where the commissioning takes on its more political nature. For many years, politicians from all parties have sought to distance themselves from commissioning decisions and put them in the hands of officials or other arm's length bodies. While this may have improved the quality and efficiency of the process, it is not geared towards commissioning, which takes into account a wider set of factors. This, perhaps I would suggest, requires some political direction. Ultimately, local councillors, local mayors, ministers have to create the framework through which commissioners can appropriately weigh up competing bids. And they have to do more to articulate visions for their local communities and how they see other organisations, such as social enterprises and voluntary organisations, playing their part in creating such a vision. Creative procurement does mean that there will be more challenges for public bodies to resolve when they are procuring services, but I believe that these challenges can be far outweighed by the potential for better outcomes. The aim of the Act is to reinforce a cultural change in the way that public sector bodies commission and procure goods and services. With the scale of the financial challenges that we face in the years ahead, we need to move away from a command and control approach to the delivery of public services in which focus is placed on processes rather than outcomes. In my view, again, we need a more collaborative approach between public sector organisations, the private sector and civil society organisations. We need a more engaging procurement process in which we seek to reach out to citizens and to co-produce services, recognising the resources that citizens already have and delivering services with them rather than for them or even at them. The Social Value Act could be seen as an opportunity rather than a direction from central government, and I believe that it is important for procurement officials to engage with that process. Since the Act came into effect in January 2013, I have been meeting regularly with organisations, particularly civil society organisations, which are keen to take up the Act and to engage in the delivery of public services, and I will continue to do so in my role as Social Value Ambassador. However, this will not be realised unless there is a similar interest from procurers and commissioners, and so I would hope that you would be encouraged to think carefully about the opportunities that social value can provide and to work with these civil society organisations and private sector organisations to see how we can generate maximum public benefit through public sector procurement. I appreciate that the next few years will not be easy when there is a downward pressure to reduce costs. But I believe very strongly that the social value approach is the key to reducing long-term cost of public services. Ultimately, costs will only come down if there are less people using those services. That means achieving better outcomes, or even more effectively preventing people from needing to use those services in the first place. Again, this means thinking holistically about how we improve the quality of life of communities so that there is less need for public services, a greater focus on prevention and seeking to pool budgets, getting away from the silos and the narrow budget lines to doing things in a more holistic way. The government has recently been running pilots on community budgeting, taking forward the work of the Total Place initiative. I believe that this is the future of public sector spending, recognising that we need to be focusing on outcomes for communities rather than which particular silo is responsible for spending that money or would be responsible for benefiting from saving that money at the cost of another silo. I believe this approach to public sector spending will enable social value to thrive, and I hope the government will introduce community budgets across the country in coming years. In the meantime, I believe that public bodies should seek to organise their spending in terms of projects and outcomes rather than narrow administrative definitions. It must not be a question of who is spending the money necessarily, but the outcomes that are being achieved and the value that is being created is the key to the future. The cultural change will essentially take time, but I believe that we have a unique opportunity with a public that is more engaged with the issues and with a government that is willing to support and experiment with new approaches. I am ambitious for this Act and the social value and gender in total. I believe that it has come at the right time when the public is ready to debate these issues of public spending priorities. Commissioners, of course, have a crucial role to play in implementing the social value approach, engaging with community organisations and developing the frameworks necessary through which local services can be commissioned. However, in the end, the outcome of the Social Value Act is in the hands of people such as yourselves, who will be most intimately involved with the process of the Act. In my new role, I am also keen to see successful deployment of social value in commissioning. And if you do have first-hand knowledge of success in the delivery of social value, then I would be delighted if you were to get in touch. Alternatively, if you have queries about the Act, my office is well geared up to respond to those queries, of which there are quite a number already. I hope that you will use this Act to support more creative commissioning, innovative approaches in difficult times. We can say that it has made a positive difference in the lives of communities across our country. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.